Surprise. We're going to start in Ephesians 2. Can you all hear me okay? I kind of don't have a voice. You can hear me? Okay, great. All right. I'm going to be talking to you today about a curtain. A very important curtain, I think. An interesting curtain, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's start in verse 16 of Ephesians 2. And that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby, and came and preached peace to you which were afar off, and to them that were nigh. For through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. So we've already looked a little bit this weekend at what it meant for the Gentiles to be included in the one body and in the household of faith. But what did it mean to the children of Israel to have access to God? What did their relationship with God look like before Jesus Christ came? Turn to Exodus 26. We're going to look a little bit at the relationship that God had with his people before Jesus Christ. And we're going to start in this record here, and this is God giving Moses the instructions for how to build the tabernacle. So this is your wood will be exactly this many cubits long, and you will make this covering out of this skin and all that type of stuff. And then in the middle of this, God says you'll make a veil out of these different colored linens, and we're going to pick it up in verse 33, where God says, And thou shalt hang up the veil under the taches in the tabernacle, that thou mayest bring in thither within the veil the ark of the testimony. And the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy. And if you remember, the holy place is where God lived. So one of the very first things that God gives in the instructions to his children or to his people is the establishing of a barrier between the place where God resides and the place where the children of Israel can go. And nobody's allowed in there. Let's turn to Leviticus 16. Well, with an exception, one person is allowed in there. We're still going to look at Leviticus 16. And we're going to start in verse 2 here. And the Lord said unto Moses, you good? Okay, verse 2. And the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. So God tells Moses, hey, tell your brother Aaron, the high priest of Israel, that he can't come into my presence whenever he wants, because if he does, then he'll die. And in fact, we're going to look a little bit later in this chapter at verse 11. Aaron, the high priest, had to follow this very specific set of requirements in order to come before the presence of the Lord. Look at verse 11 here. And Aaron shall bring the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and for his house, and shall kill the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself, and he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil, and he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. And if he doesn't follow this exact set of procedures and wear this very specific robe and do all of these very specific things, when he comes into the presence of the Lord, then he'll die. And later in the chapter you see that he can only come in once a year into the most holy place. And there just was no access for the children of Israel to come in and to be in the presence of their Lord. And that's not really any kind of relationship. Like, imagine if you had a relationship like that with a person, where they're like, hey, my name's Chloe, you can only talk to me once a year. Goodbye. You can't talk to me anymore. That's not really any kind of relationship. But turn to Isaiah 25. So they had all of these laws that governed when the children of Israel, or when the high priest, I suppose, could come in before the presence of the Lord. But they were promised by the prophet Isaiah that one day that would change, that one day the veil would be taken away and they would have access to their God. Look at verse 7 of Isaiah 25. And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over all nations. So the children of Israel had this hope that, hey, one day we'll be able to take away the veil and see the face of our God. And when did that happen? Turn to Matthew 27. This chapter is the crucifixion record in Matthew. And as we know, Jesus Christ came to fulfill the law and to give access to both the Jews and the Gentiles, to give them access to God. We're going to start in verse 50 here, chapter 27. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. So when Jesus died, when he was crucified, and when he fulfilled the law, this veil, this barrier between God and his people was ripped in half. And the people were eventually, after the resurrection, but the people were allowed to have access to their God. And they were able to come in and into the presence of their Lord. Turn to Hebrews 9. We're going to close here. And we're going to start in verse 6. Now, when these things were thus ordained, when the rules for interacting with God in the tabernacle, when these rules were first ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But into the second, the holiest of holies, went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. We read this in Leviticus 16. And then verse 8 tells us why. The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing. The way into the holiest of all, into the presence of God, was not yet made manifest for the people of God. Well, when was it made manifest? Turn to verse 11. But Christ, being come an high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood, he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. When Christ was crucified, he brought his own sinless blood into the holy place, into the presence of God, and obtained eternal redemption for the children of Israel. And now the people of God could come into the presence of the Lord. And it doesn't seem like a really big deal to us maybe, but imagine growing up with just this thing, and you have like a wall between you and this thing, and you can't go in or else you'll die. And then all of a sudden somebody tells you, yeah, you can go in whenever you want. You can talk to that scary thing behind the veil, and you won't die. Just imagine how big of a deal that is to the children of Israel. And that's for us too, for the Gentiles as well. But I wanted to share that with you about the veil, just to kind of give a little more understanding of what it was like for the children of Israel. So that's it.